They say home is where the heart is. Well, my heart is still back on that 100-acre stretch of rolling hills, under the shade of the old oak tree my father, Mr. Henderson, planted the year I was born. My heart is in the rich, dark soil of my vegetable garden, in the familiar creak of the old farmhouse porch swing, in the gentle lowing of my neighbor's cows at dusk. But my body? My body is here, in this place. Room 2B, Golden Valley Care Center. The window looks out onto a bleak, gray brick wall, eternally shadowed. The air smells faintly of disinfectant and boiled cabbage, a smell that clings to the back of my throat. My own nephew, Kevin Miller, the boy I practically raised after his own mother, my sister, passed too young, the one I loved like a son, he put me here. He said I was too old to live alone, that it was for my own safety. His voice, when he told me, was so full of concern, his eyes so earnest and troubled. But I confess, as I sit here on this lumpy, uncomfortable bed and stare at these drab, institution green walls, a terrible, corrosive suspicion gnaws at me. His concern was not for my safety, but for his easy access to my land, my farm, the only home I have ever known, the only thing of real value I possess in this world. I clutch the small, smooth stone from the creek bed on my farm, hidden deep in the pocket of my worn cardigan. It's cool against my palm, my only tangible link to the life that was stolen from me. If you are listening to this story, thank you so much for being here. Let us know where you are joining us from in the world, and do not forget to subscribe to become part of our growing community. My name is Beatrice Holloway, B to my friends, though I haven't had many of those in recent years living out on the farm. I am 75 years old. Or, as Kevin so delicately put it, getting on. My farm, Holloway's 100, has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather cleared the land. My father nurtured it, taught me every contour, every secret of the soil. I learned to mend fences before I learned to properly darn socks. I can tell you when to plant by the feel of the wind and the look of the moon. I have always been independent, never married, no children of my own. The farm was my spouse, my child, my life's work. Kevin was my sister's only child. When she died, he was just a boy of 10. His father was, well, mostly absent. So I stepped in. He spent summers at the farm, Christmases. I helped him with his schooling, listened to his dreams. As he got older, I helped him financially, more times than I care to admit. There was always some promising business venture that needed a little seed money, some temporary setback that required a loan he swore he'd repay. I saw him as my only family, the one who would carry on the Holloway name, perhaps even keep the farm in the family when I was gone. My dearest wish was to see him settled, happy, responsible. My deepest fear, even before all this, was losing my independence and, God forbid, losing the farm. The beginning of the end came so innocently, as these things often do. About a month ago, I was out in the barn, checking on a loose floorboard I'd been meaning to fix. I tripped. It was a silly fall, more a stumble, really. I landed on my hip, got a nasty bruise, and my pride was more injured than anything else. But I was shaken. I called Kevin, not because I needed help, but more for a bit of reassurance, a familiar voice. He rushed over, his face a mask of exaggerated concern, his eyes wide with alarm. "Aunt Bee! Oh my goodness, are you all right? This is exactly what I have been worried about. You living out here all alone, miles from anyone. What if something worse had happened? What if you had broken a hip and couldn't reach the phone?" Over the next few days, Kevin became increasingly, almost suffocatingly insistent that I could not manage on my own anymore. He talked about my forgetfulness. I had misplaced my reading glasses once. My frailty. I was 75, not dead. He mentioned a wonderful doctor he knew, a Dr. Alistair Finch, who apparently specialized in geriatric care. He cajoled and pressured me into an assessment with this doctor. Though I was annoyed by his relentless fussing, and frankly, a little insulted, I reluctantly agreed to see Dr. Finch. Mostly to appease Kevin, to prove to him that I was perfectly fine and capable of managing my own life, as I had done for 3/4 of a century. The appointment was a farce. Dr. Finch, a man with cold eyes and an overly smooth manner, conducted the most cursory of examinations. He asked me a few leading questions about my memory. "Do you often forget appointments, Ms. Holloway? Do you find it difficult to manage your finances?" All while Kevin hovered solicitously in the background, nodding gravely at my perfectly reasonable answers, as if they confirmed his worst fears. I tried to explain that I managed a 100-acre farm, paid my own bills, and still made the best darn apple pie in the county, but Dr. Finch just smiled indulgently and made notes on his clipboard. I felt a prickle of unease then, a sense that this was less an assessment and more a preordained conclusion. A week later, Kevin arrived at the farm. Dr. Finch was with him, looking smug. Kevin held a sheaf of official-looking documents in his hand. His voice, when he spoke, dripped with a false, cloying sympathy that made my stomach churn. He explained that based on Dr. Finch's thorough assessment, the one I knew had been anything but, I had been deemed medically unable to safely care for myself or manage my own affairs. The documents, he claimed, gave him power of attorney for my medical decisions and, more importantly, my financial affairs to ensure my well-being and protect my assets. He had, he informed me with a sorrowful sigh, already made arrangements for me to move into the Golden Valley Care Center. "For my own good and safety, Aunt B. It's a lovely place. You will be well looked after." I was stunned into silence for a moment. Then a hot wave of fury washed over me. "Unable to care for myself? Kevin, this is outrageous. It is a lie. I am perfectly fine. That doctor barely spoke to me for 10 minutes. Kevin's charming, concerned demeanor vanished like mist on a sunny morning. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve I had never seen in him before. "Aunt B," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth, "this is not up for discussion. It is for your safety. The papers are signed and legally binding. A car from Golden Valley is coming in an hour to take you. Please, do not make this any harder than it needs to be." Then, as an afterthought, or perhaps the main thought all along, he added, "I have also had a very generous offer from a development company for the farm, a substantial offer. It will ensure you have the very best care for the rest of your days, without any financial worries." The mask had not just slipped, it had shattered. His greed, raw and ugly, was now clearly visible. I was forcibly, though without physical violence, escorted from my farm, my home, my life. I was allowed to pack only a small overnight bag. As the car pulled away down the long gravel driveway, I looked back at the old farmhouse, tears blurring my vision. I saw the oak tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like steadfast arms. I clutched the small, smooth stone from the creek bed in my pocket, its coolness a stark contrast to the burning grief and betrayal in my heart. I felt utterly powerless, utterly alone, cast adrift in a nightmare of my nephew's making. Torn from my home, from the land that held my soul, and cast into that sterile, lonely room at Golden Valley. My own flesh and blood, the boy I loved like a son, had betrayed me for 30 pieces of silver, or in this case, 100 acres of prime, developable farmland. Was this it? Was this how my story ended? A forgotten old woman in a cut-rate nursing home, slowly fading away, while my heritage, my father's legacy, was sold off to the highest bidder to line Kevin's pockets? What would you do if your worst fears were realized and the person you trusted most, the one you had poured your love into, was the very architect of your ruin? Life in Golden Valley. Care Center was as bleak as its name was ironically cheerful. The food was bland and overcooked, served on plastic trays. The daily routine was monotonous. Wake up, breakfast, sit in the dreary communal lounge, lunch, more sitting, dinner, bed. Many of the other residents seemed lost in their own worlds of dementia or quiet despair, their eyes vacant, their conversations rambling or non-existent. I was initially deeply depressed, withdrawn into a shell of grief and anger. I missed the smell of fresh earth after a rain shower, the sound of the wind sighing through the pine trees at the edge of my property, the simple, profound freedom of walking my own land. My independence, so fiercely guarded for so long, had been stripped away. There were small kindnesses, however, glimmers of humanity in the institutional gloom. Ms. Peterson, one of the nurses, an overworked but compassionate woman with tired eyes and a gentle touch, would sometimes slip me an extra cookie from the staff room or linger for a moment to ask how I was truly feeling. Her small gestures were like tiny life rafts in a sea of desolation. One afternoon, about a week into my unwilling incarceration, I was sitting in the communal lounge, trying to lose myself in a tattered copy of Pride and Prejudice, when I noticed an elderly gentleman across the room. He was meticulously working on a crossword puzzle, his brow furrowed in concentration, his expression sharp and intelligent. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that stood out amidst the general air of resignation. He caught my eye and offered a polite, almost formal nod. Over the next several days, we struck up tentative conversations. He introduced himself as Arthur Pendleton. He had a dry wit and a keen mind that reminded me a little of my father. I, initially hesitant to trust anyone after Kevin's devastating betrayal, found myself slowly drawn to his intelligence and his calm, observant demeanor. He did not pry, but he listened, really listened. Eventually, during one of our quiet chats in a sunny corner of the lounge, one of the few spots that didn't feel entirely soul-crushing, I found myself confiding in him. I told him the whole sorry tale, my minor fall, Kevin's sudden, overwhelming concern, the cursory and suspicious examination by Dr. Finch, the legal papers I barely had a chance to comprehend, and my forced, heartbreaking removal from the farm. I told him about Kevin's casual mention of the developer's offer, the words that had revealed his true, greedy hand. Arthur listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face, his expression growing increasingly serious as my story unfolded. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse with unshed tears, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, his voice grave but kind, "My dear Beatrice, if what you tell me is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt you, then I believe you have been the victim of a most egregious and calculated deception." As a retired judge, he explained, he immediately recognized the glaring red flags: the rushed medical assessment by a doctor unknown to me, the convenient acquisition of power of attorney, the immediate talk of selling a valuable asset. He then shared a little of his own story. He, too, was in Golden Valley, not entirely of his own choosing. His own children, though well-meaning, were overly cautious about his health after a minor heart scare, and had convinced him this was the safest option for him. He missed his library, his independence, but he was making the best of it. More importantly, he still had his wits about him, and, as he put it with a twinkle in his eye, a few old friends in useful places. He proposed, quite matter-of-factly, that they investigate Kevin's actions together. Two heads, especially when one has a bit of legal experience, are better than one, Beatrice, he said. For the first time in weeks, since that terrible day Kevin had driven me away from my home, I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark ignite in the darkness. I readily, gratefully agreed. Our alliance was formed. Arthur Pendleton, retired judge, became my strategic partner, his keen legal mind my greatest asset. Arthur, true to his word, began his discreet inquiries almost immediately. He made a call from the payphone in the hallway, the only phone residents were easily allowed to use, to a former colleague, a man who now ran a small but reputable private investigation agency. Arthur asked him, as an old favor, to do a quick, informal background check on my nephew, Kevin Miller, specifically looking for any signs of financial distress or unusual activity. A few days later, the investigator called back. Arthur took the call, his expression unreadable as he listened. When he rejoined me in our usual corner of the lounge, his face was grim. "Well, Beatrice," he said quietly, "it seems your nephew's sudden and profound concern for your safety coincides rather conveniently with a pressing need for a very large sum of money. Kevin Miller, it appears, is drowning in debt. Significant gambling losses, several overdue loans from rather unsavory lenders. There are whispers around town that he's desperate for a big score, an urgent influx of cash." The news, while not entirely surprising, still landed like a blow. To hear it confirmed, to know that Kevin's betrayal was driven by something as sordid and common as gambling debts, cheapened his actions even further, if that were possible. "So the sale of my farm," I said, my voice flat, "would certainly provide that, wouldn't it?" Arthur nodded slowly. "Indeed it would. This confirms our worst suspicions about his motives, Beatrice. The fight is now clearly defined. We are not just dealing with misguided concern, we are dealing with calculated greed and criminal intent." With Kevin's motive now starkly clear, Arthur then turned his attention to Dr. Alistair Finch, the physician who had so conveniently declared me incompetent. Arthur had a vague recollection of seeing Finch's name associated with a few questionable medical certifications and expert testimonies during his later years on the bench. He asked his investigator friend to delve into Dr. Finch's professional history, looking for any ethical complaints, disciplinary actions, or, crucially, any previously known connections to Kevin Miller. Meanwhile, I had my own part to play. Kevin still made infrequent, brief visits to Golden Valley. His visits were always filled with an overly cheerful solicitousness that now made my skin crawl. He would inquire about my health, pat my hand, and then, inevitably, steer the conversation towards the fantastic offer from the developers. He would bring new papers for me to sign, just some formalities, Aunt B, to move things along, which I steadfastly refused to do, feigning increased confusion, a tremor in my hand that made holding a pen impossible, or simply claiming my reading glasses were missing again. I played the part of a slightly confused, increasingly frail old woman, lulling him into a false sense of security while secretly noting every word, every subtle shift in his demeanor, every bead of sweat on his brow when I stalled. The investigator's report on Dr. Finch arrived about a week later. It was damning. While there were no formal disciplinary actions on his record, there was a pattern of association with ethically dubious clinics and a reputation among some medical colleagues for being flexible with diagnoses for the right price. But the crucial piece of evidence, the one that made Arthur's eyes gleam with grim satisfaction, was financial. The investigator had managed to uncover, through a source in a local bank, a series of significant cash payments made from an offshore account. An account the investigator strongly suspected was linked to Kevin's hidden gambling winnings, or, more likely, an advance from one of his loan sharks. directly into Dr. Alistair Finch's personal bank account. These payments were made just days after my assessment and my swift committal to Golden Valley. The total amount was substantial, far exceeding any legitimate consultation fee a doctor of Finch's standing might command. It was, quite clearly, a bribe. "This, Beatrice," Arthur said, tapping the report with a decisive finger, "is the smoking gun. This proves collusion between your nephew and Dr. Finch. This is grounds for a serious legal challenge. We need proper legal representation, and we need it immediately." He knew just the person. Eleanor Vance, a sharp, ethical, and tenacious lawyer he had mentored years ago when she was a young law clerk. She had since built a formidable reputation for her work in elder advocacy and fighting precisely this kind of financial fraud and exploitation. Arthur contacted her, explained the situation briefly, and arranged for her to visit me at Golden Valley, posing as a distant cousin to avoid arousing suspicion. Eleanor Vance was a breath of fresh air. Young, energetic, with eyes that missed nothing, she listened intently as Arthur laid out the evidence they had gathered, and as I recounted my story yet again, this time with the backing of Arthur's meticulous groundwork. She was impressed and clearly outraged by the injustice of my situation. She agreed to take the case, pro bono initially, confident that they could win and eventually recoup all legal costs from Kevin. She explained her proposed legal strategy: file a lawsuit immediately to contest the fraudulently obtained power of attorney, demand an independent medical evaluation for me by a court-appointed geriatric specialist, and formally accuse Kevin Miller and Dr. Alistair Finch of conspiracy to commit fraud and illegal committal. Kevin, of course, was entirely unaware of these developments. He continued his visits, increasing his pressure on me to sign the farm sale documents. He brought new versions, printed in larger type, simplified for you to understand, Aunt B. His charming facade was cracking more frequently now, his impatience showing in the tightness around his mouth, the tapping of his foot. He even resorted to veiled threats. "You know, Aunt B," he said one afternoon, his voice losing its usual syrupy sweetness, "if you do not cooperate soon, these developers might just walk away, and then there will be no money for your excellent care here at Golden Valley. We might have to find a less comfortable arrangement for you." I, coached by Arthur and now by Eleanor via discreet phone calls, continued to stall, feigning increased confusion, memory lapses, and a general frailty that seemed to satisfy Kevin that his plan was working, even as it bought us precious time. One afternoon, Kevin was visiting. He had been particularly insistent about some new papers, and I had been particularly vague and uncooperative. Frustrated, he stepped out into the hallway to take an agitated phone call, clearly thinking I was napping or too befuddled to notice. Ms. Peterson, the kind nurse who had become increasingly sympathetic to my plight after a few quiet, carefully worded conversations with Arthur, happened to be at the nearby nursing station, within clear earshot. She later recounted the conversation to us, her eyes wide with indignation. She had overheard Kevin's side of it, his voice low and urgent. "Look, I told you the old lady is being difficult, more difficult than I expected. Just stall the creditors a little longer, will you? I promise. Once this farm deal goes through, everyone gets paid, especially me." "What?" "Yeah, Finch got his cut already, so he better keep his damn mouth shut." "What are you saying? She's talking to who? A lawyer?" "No, that's impossible. She barely knows what day it is. She can't even find her own teeth half the time." Ms. Peterson discreetly and accurately reported this to Arthur and me later that day. Kevin's barely concealed panic, his inadvertent admission of paying Dr. Finch, and his arrogant dismissal of my mental faculties, coupled with his obvious fear of lawyers, were all invaluable. It showed that Kevin was feeling the heat, that he was under immense financial pressure, and that he was becoming increasingly reckless. "He is rattled, Beatrice," Arthur said, a rare, grim smile touching his lips. "And rattled men, my dear, often make very foolish mistakes." Eleanor Vance moved quickly. The lawsuit was filed. A few days later, Kevin Miller was officially served with the legal papers, a thick, intimidating packet of them, right at the doorstep of his fancy, heavily mortgaged suburban house. His reaction was explosive. He was furious, terrified, and utterly blindsided. He stormed into Golden Valley later that afternoon, bypassing the front desk, his face contorted with a rage I had never witnessed in him before, not even as a rebellious teenager. He burst into my room, where I was quietly reading with Arthur. He dropped all pretense of concern, all semblance of familial affection. "How dare you!" he screamed, his voice hoarse, spittle flying from his lips. "After everything I have done for you, all the care, all the concern. You ungrateful old woman. You will ruin everything, everything. I will see to it you never get out of here. You will rot in this place before you ever see that farm again." He was wild-eyed, desperate. He lunged towards my small bedside table and snatched some of my personal papers, rifling through them, perhaps looking for the original farm deed or any other documents he could destroy or use. He was menacing, and for a terrifying moment, I felt a genuine, visceral stab of fear. This was not the charming, if weak, nephew I had known. This was a desperate, cornered animal. Arthur, hearing the commotion from the hallway, where he had momentarily stepped out, re-entered the room swiftly, followed by two burly orderlies, whom Ms. Peterson, with admirable presence of mind, had alerted. Kevin, seeing them, backed off, his face still dark with fury. He continued to spew threats and accusations, calling me senile, vindictive, a crazy old bat, before finally storming out, leaving a wake of fear and turmoil. I was badly shaken. The raw, undisguised hatred in Kevin's eyes had been terrifying. For a fleeting, despairing moment, doubt crept in. What if he managed to find a way to discredit me completely, to paint me as truly incompetent, a danger to myself and others? What if he had hidden assets or resorted to threats against Arthur or Eleanor? The fight suddenly seemed overwhelming. I felt old, tired, and profoundly vulnerable. The image of my beloved farm, perhaps lost to me forever, shimmered painfully behind my eyelids. Arthur sat with me for a long time after Kevin had gone, his presence calm and reassuring. He reminded me of the solid evidence we had painstakingly gathered, of Eleanor Vance's sharp competence and unwavering commitment to my case, of his own steadfast support. "Beatrice," he said firmly, his hand gently covering mine, "that was the desperate, ugly act of a cornered animal. He knows he is losing. We have truth and justice firmly on our side. Do not let his bluster intimidate you now. We are so very close to seeing this through." Later that day, Eleanor Vance called, having been immediately informed of the incident by Arthur. She was outraged by Kevin's behavior, but also, in a strange way, professionally invigorated. "That outburst, Bea," she said, her voice crisp and confident, "only strengthens our case. It demonstrates his instability, his guilt, and his clear motive for wanting you silenced and controlled. I have already filed for an emergency restraining order against him to prevent any further harassment, and I am fast-tracking our request for your independent medical evaluation by a court-appointed geriatric specialist. His little tantrum just handed us more ammunition." Drawing strength from Arthur's quiet resolve and Eleanor's confident professionalism, I felt my own fighting spirit, which had flickered dangerously low, begin to rekindle. I would not be broken. I would not be silenced. I would see this through, not just for myself, not just for my farm, but for the memory of my father, for the sanctity of my home, and for every other elderly person who had ever been dismissed, devalued, or defrauded by those they trusted. Kevin thought he had me trapped, a helpless old woman in a dreary cage of his making. He was about to find out that this caged bird had found her voice, a surprisingly strong one, and a rather formidable flock to back her up. The courtroom, not the sterile confines of the Golden Valley Care Center, would be our final battleground. Weeks turned into a couple of months. The legal battle intensified, a slow, grinding process of motions, depositions, and discoveries. Eleanor Vance was magnificent, a whirlwind of focused energy and sharp legal acumen. She meticulously built our case, brick by undeniable brick. The court-ordered independent medical evaluation was conducted by a highly respected geriatric psychiatrist who, after a lengthy and thorough examination, declared me perfectly lucid, mentally competent, and entirely capable of managing my own affairs. Her report was a scathing refutation of Dr. Finch's hastily scribbled, falsified assessment. Depositions were taken. Dr. Alistair Finch, facing the terrifying prospect of losing his medical license, public disgrace, and potential criminal charges, crumbled under Eleanor's relentless, precise questioning. He eventually agreed to testify against Kevin in exchange for a plea deal with the district attorney's office, who were now taking a very keen interest in the case. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. I felt a mixture of apprehension and a steely resolve. I wore a smart new navy blue dress that Arthur, with surprising good taste, had helped me order online. Eleanor was by my side, calm and confident. Arthur sat in the public gallery, a reassuring, dignified presence. Across the courtroom, Kevin sat with his increasingly stressed and expensive-looking lawyer. He looked pale, disheveled, and distinctly unwell, the charming veneer completely gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful glower. Eleanor Vance presented our case with masterful clarity. She laid out the evidence piece by damning piece, Dr. Finch's original falsified medical report alongside the new comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Finch's own sworn testimony admitting to the bribery and his collusion with Kevin. Bank records meticulously tracing Kevin's escalating gambling debts and the subsequent suspicious payments into Finch's account. Ms. Peterson's clear testimony about Kevin's panicked, overheard phone call. And finally, my own story. When I was called to testify, I took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. I told the court about my love for my farm, the legacy of my parents, my initial deep trust and affection for Kevin, and the profound devastation and betrayal I felt at his actions. I described my experiences in Golden Valley, the feeling of powerlessness, of being erased. I spoke clearly, without histrionics, but with an honesty that I hoped would resonate. Kevin's lawyer tried his best to paint me as a confused, vindictive old woman, easily influenced by Arthur, out to ruin her loving nephew's reputation. But his arguments sounded hollow, desperate, in the face of the mountain of evidence Eleanor had presented. The judge, a stern-faced woman who, by a rather satisfying coincidence, knew of Judge Arthur Pendleton by his formidable reputation, listened intently to all the testimony. When it was time for her to deliver the ruling, the courtroom was utterly silent. She looked directly at Kevin. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice devoid of warmth, "the evidence presented before this court is overwhelming and deeply disturbing." She then delivered her ruling. The power of attorney granted to Kevin Miller over the affairs of Beatrice Holloway was immediately and permanently revoked. Beatrice Holloway was declared fully mentally competent and capable of managing her own affairs. The proposed sale of the Holloway farm was nullified, and any existing agreements voided. And then, the words that made my heart sing. She formally referred the cases of both Kevin Miller and Dr. Alistair Finch to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation into multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and felony elder abuse. As the judge read the final part of her verdict, Kevin, in a last desperate display of his true character, leaped to his feet, shouting, "This is a travesty! She'll squander the farm. She doesn't know what she's doing. That old woman is crazy." His outburst was cut short by a sharp rap of the judge's gavel and the swift approach of two courtroom bailiffs. His desperate display only served to solidify everyone's negative impression of him and seal his fate. Kevin was stunned into silence by the judge's stern rebuke, then escorted from the courtroom by the bailiffs, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning terror, as the full implications of the ruling and the impending criminal charges finally sank in. He faced not only financial ruin, but the very real prospect of a significant prison sentence. Dr. Finch, I later learned, would lose his medical license and also faced serious criminal charges, his career and reputation in tatters. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me weep washed over me. I felt Arthur's hand on my shoulder. I looked up at him, and his eyes, usually so keen and analytical, were shining with pride and genuine affection. "You did it, Beatrice," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You truly did it." Eleanor Vance was beaming, shaking my hand warmly. As we left the courtroom, a small crowd of reporters, who had somehow gotten wind of the salacious case of a greedy nephew trying to steal Granny's farm, tried to approach me with microphones and flashing cameras. But Arthur, with a stern glare that still carried the weight of the bench, and Eleanor, with a polite but firm no comment, shielded me effectively. Returning to my beloved farm a few days later was like stepping back into the sunshine after a long, dark winter. Arthur was by my side, of course. He had found himself a small, comfortable apartment in the nearby town, but he made it clear he intended to be a frequent visitor to Holloway's 100. The farmhouse was a little dusty, the garden a bit overgrown from my weeks of absence. But it was home. The air smelled sweet of hay and damp earth. The familiar sounds of birdsong and the distant moo of cows were a balm to my soul, my soul. I decided, on my own terms and with Eleanor's excellent advice, to sell a small, less productive 20-acre parcel of my land, not to developers, but to a young, enthusiastic organic farming couple Eleanor knew. The sale gave me a comfortable financial cushion, more than enough to live comfortably and to make some much-needed repairs to the old farmhouse and barn. And with some of that money and a renewed sense of purpose that bubbled up inside me like a spring, I set about a new project. I had the old, slightly dilapidated barn beautifully repaired and restored. And on a 5-acre plot near the main road, I established the Holloway Henderson Community Garden, named in honor of my family and my father's enduring love for this land. It became a place where seniors from the local area, especially those who were lonely or lacked their own green space, and yes, even some of the more able-bodied residents from Golden Valley on organized weekly outings, could come to garden, to socialize, to share stories, and to enjoy the fresh air and sunshine. Ms. Peterson, my kind nurse from Golden Valley, became a regular volunteer on her days off, her smile much brighter now. Arthur was, naturally, a regular fixture at the community garden. He would dispense gardening advice, often unsolicited, but usually correct, engage in lively debates about current events with other visitors, and share quiet cups of tea with me on the newly repaired porch of the barn. Our friendship, forged in the unlikely setting of a dreary nursing home, had deepened into a warm, affectionate, and deeply comforting companionship. I often walk down to the creek in the evenings, just as the sun is setting, and hold that smooth, familiar stone in my hand. It's no longer a secret comfort clutched in a pocket, a desperate link to a life I feared was lost. Now it's a happy reminder of resilience, of an unexpected friendship, and of a hard-won victory. I am no longer a victim, a forgotten old woman. I am Beatrice Holloway, mistress of my own farm, founder of a thriving community garden, and a beloved, respected member of my new, expanded community. The farm is thriving, more alive than ever, not as my solitary refuge anymore, but as a place of connection, growth, and shared joy. I learned a valuable lesson through all this. I learned that even in the darkest of times, when you feel utterly alone and betrayed, unexpected allies can emerge from the most unlikely places. I learned that the human spirit, especially when fueled by a righteous sense of justice and a deep love for what is truly yours, can overcome profound betrayal and seemingly insurmountable odds. I learned that age is not a barrier to fighting for what's right, and that true wealth lies not in acres of land or dollars in the bank, but in community, in purpose, and in the quiet courage to reclaim one's life and dignity. Kevin tried to bury me, to silence me, to erase me, but he didn't realize I was a seed. And with a little help from a wise old judge and the nourishment of friendship and justice, I bloomed again, stronger and more vibrant than ever. Thank you for joining Beatrice on her incredible journey from betrayal to triumph. Her story reminds us that resilience, friendship, and a fighting spirit can turn the tables on injustice, no matter our age or circumstances. If Beatrice's victory resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Give this video a like and share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We love hearing from you. And be sure to check out our other stories of courage, resilience, and sweet, well-deserved revenge. We hope to see you back here again very soon.